We're standing in the rhododendron patch and blueberry patch, and there's rusty Menziesii here also. All of them are related. The salmonberries are not. But anyway, they're all in the Ericaceae, and of course some are, well, there are also evergreen blueberries and huckleberries too. But still, they're related plants. They all like the same acid soil conditions too. So, you know, if blueberries grow well here, then rhododendrons should grow pretty well too in the, in similar soil. Although the blueberries and rusty Menziesii will tolerate a bit more moisture. So for rhododendrons, we generally want to add, if we can add more sand or make raised mounds or something like that, the rhododendrons will do better. Although you can also very lightly fertilize your blueberries if you want to make more blueberries and thin out the competing other plants. I mean, down in Seattle, you can grow rhododendrons in quite shady places. It's brighter down there, it's warmer down there. Here, with our lower light levels that we have, more sun is going to result in more flowers. I mean, for everything, but rhododendrons particularly. And so choosing the right spot initially, or like we said down here, if trees grow up, which they do, there's might be really little trees 20 years ago, and now suddenly they're 30-foot tall spruce trees, hemlock trees, maple trees, whatever. They shade. And so you gotta make some choices. The nice thing, like you mentioned though, is that rhododendrons are pretty easy to move. So if you move them from the shade out into the sun, they're gonna be happier. They have a nice, tight, fibrous, shallow root system. That's not so good when we get the hot, sunny weather like we had some of earlier in the spring or in the summer. But they hold the soil together and they don't send out shoots in long, far directions like a maple tree does, or the hemlock trees, or the spruce trees. So, some of those spruce trees or hemlocks over there could well, some of them have been chewed up a bit, but they could well have roots coming all the way out here. And so then they can be stealing nutrients too from the trees, from the rhododendrons and other shrubs. So that's another reason you might want to move them, or even make a dedicated fabric-lined bed perhaps for them to try to keep out the roots of the spruces, the hemlocks, the alders, the cottonwoods that we have around here. Huh. So here we've got PJM rhododendrons, which are a small-leaved, small-flowered rhododendron, along with some larger ones. We've got Roseum elegans and other assorted ones, large-leaved ones. Culture pretty much the same. Shape and size is different. Some of these, something like the PJM, can be hedged essentially. If you plant a row of them and you want a whole hedge of them, and there's some variability in those. Again, down south, Seattle area and such, they have evergreen azaleas, which are traditionally used as hedges, commonly seen in Japanese gardens. But again, there's some differences there. They're not as hardy. They're not hardy enough for us, the evergreen azaleas. Generally around southeast Alaska, we're mostly growing deciduous azaleas. Drop their leaves. Some are fragrant, some are not. So with these, again, and you get closer, I mean, they're thick. They're thick, lots of stems in there. Similarly, we can cut them back. We can thin them back if we want. We can give them a hard haircut if we wanted to, actually with hedge pruners, hedge clippers, or something like that, if we wanted to. But again, even on these, if you get up close, you can see the little buds, the flower buds on these for next year, already formed. So truly, one of the best times for pruning rhododendrons is immediately after they're done flowering. For us, that means from mid-June, say, to mid-July, because then they'll be growing their new growth and forming new flower buds for next year. So if we come along, deadhead the flowers, the old flowers that are done, and then if we want to prune it back some, that's a good time to do it, because we may get more flower buds. We're not taking off flower buds like we are likely be doing now. What we're looking at is a Helsinki rhododendron, and lots of big flower buds here, but then also below it are buds which are probably going to be vegetative buds. And usually we'll see a main big bud in the center, and then some of those vegetative buds which will come up from around them. If we move over to, there's the remains of the old, these are the seed pods of the rhododendron. And I'm holding the two of the stems which grew this year to give us more. As in our case, we're lucky. I must have been fed well enough. So we got two more flower buds where we had only one last year. So again, this is where removing that stem out of the middle is good. Most of us aren't trying to save rhododendron seeds, and it takes a lot of energy for them to stay on. And it's tidying up the rhododendron plant in the process. For rhododendrons, again, you've got to decide which ones go in which places, because for how big they're going to get.
Right.
Like you turn around that way, and there's how big. How
totally dry.
Leanne, about how old is that
That's
plant?
the same as the other one up front. It's I was here before we bought the house in '99.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there are there's three in there. There's three that grew together.
Okay, so what we're looking at, again, this is mid-September. So we're seeing the oldest leaves of some of the rhododendrons turning color, which is perfectly fine, and they will fall off. Rhododendrons are evergreens. They'll usually keep leaves for so this is 22 leaves. Here's 21 leaves, and there's a few leaves here from 20, and there's actually a few leaves from 19 down here. But eventually they come off. You know, they fall off, and they basically mulch themselves. They're evergreen. So in the winter time, or when they are stressed, water stressed, moisture stressed usually, the leaves will tend to curl down. Cold, dry weather, or if the soil is frozen, they can't. Otherwise, they need to keep pulling moisture up out of the soil for their roots. So their defense mechanism is the leaves will curl under, kind of make almost a tube, and they will droop to conserve moisture. Unfortunately, when we see that in the middle of summer or late summer like this, that is not a good sign for survival. That may, again, we had a hot spell this summer, a couple of them, and if they didn't get watered enough during that hot spell, they may die. So hard to say if the homeowner is patient, leaves them out here to see what happens. Will they come back next year? Maybe, maybe, yeah, we'll see. So, and when you start looking also at other indicators, I'll look at the stem, especially the freshest stem on here, and they start to get wrinkly again. So again, that's drying. You know, the stems themselves are drying as well as the leaves have dried out. So it's unfortunate. It happens. But it's a small percentage of many rhododendrons that we see here.
And they get knocked down a lot during the windstorm because I don't have them anchored, and so if I'm not out here to pick them up,
and so again, if they get knocked over, then you know even the rest of them get rained on or sprinkled, whichever. If they got a sprinkler here, then those would dry out more easily. So that can be an issue. So if you see it in the winter, it's common, and that is one of the reasons why people will take landscaping fabric or burlap with a couple of sticks around and actually wrap around them, especially on a windy site, where again the wind is drying, you know, it's a dehydrating wind. So if you can do that and prevent them from drying out so much, and which can also help to keep deer away from the rhododendrons too, if they want to put a fence around your rhododendrons. So
Really?
It's time and effort. You know, what do you have time for? What do you want to look at? I've seen some of them very creative pallets leaned up, one on each side for small ones like this.
Yeah, I've seen that
and then
too.
you wrap those with fabric,
Oh.
which works, but it's a lot of work to do that if you've got a bunch
Protection
of them.
from the snow load, the wind.
Right,
the
well,
deer,
snow
the
load
rain.
too, because yeah, snow can sit on top of them and they can be kind of brittle and break branches off. And that too is a problem. You know, we get a lot of heavy wet snow here.
Or
Hopefully
if it's
again this
planted
year.
underneath.
Or if it dumps, well, yeah, if it's dumping off a roof or something, or even underneath a tree.
Yeah.
You know, like underneath the edge of a tree, you get a pile of snow on branches, and suddenly it drops and flattens the rhododendron. The fairly mature rhododendrons, 20 to 30-year-old, most likely. And what we're seeing is that got lots of branches. I mean, the lower green growth has been shaded out as it's grown, which means that we then get dead stuff underneath. So the dead stuff is what would be a good removing. That's the first stuff to remove in a pruning effort, a pruning job, is deadwood. Because deadwood does not benefit the tree, the plant, the rhododendron in this case, at all. So we're just remove it, cut it back clean, and then of course there's some of these they got little scraggly branches that are going up. They're reaching, they're trying to get to the sun up there. But again, taking that stuff out, some of it, if it's dry enough, it will just snap off easily, some not so much. Yeah, so you're wondering, okay, is it dead or is it alive? And so we try to scratch through, and that's really hard to scratch, but it's really brown underneath. And here we scratch, and it's green. See the greenness there underneath. And again, that old extension agent of ours used to say, grab the branch, grab a hold of it, and feel what the temperature feels like on that one. And then you do the same thing on the other one. The green branch, because of the moisture in it, is likely to feel cooler than the dry branch will. So kind of an interesting thing whether it's a big tree or if you think, oh, it's got a chance to grow maybe, hopefully, perhaps. Anyway, that was kind of interesting. And you do it on a trunk of a tree. How to prune, like pruning back to the branch collar for best healing and other stuff. So again, rhododendrons go by different rules. So where we mentioned earlier that we can cut back a rhododendron and leave stubs, like some of these, and they may still sprout along those stubs, or like you get little ones here, this was cut back and it sprouted from the hidden buds which are along that stem. So that part isn't so critical to take it back to, I guess we'll use that one, to take this back right to the branch collar, and try not to leave a little stub like that so that it'll heal over. It isn't so critical. So but if we can, I know that's kind of interesting there, we see, and usually we talk about removing rubbing branches, so you can see where that's been rubbing in the past right here. There's little bare spots there. That one I might clip off. Or again, you might just clip it all the way back to here. And then partially just to make it look better. And even though there are some leaves out there. So if you want it to look neater and tidier, don't leave the stubs, and you might again be pruning it back to the nice, where you can see the nice zigzagging branches on the tree, and just leave, you know, like here we've got a bit more of a stub. Something like that may not sprout much. Again, timing, if you want to encourage that sprouting along the branches down low, if you're doing a severe pruning, say if I were to prune it back here, better to wait till spring. And then again, more of the nutrients, in this case with evergreens, there's some nutrients up in the leaves, but still more of them are going to be down in in the soil, in the roots. So if we prune in the spring, then we're more likely to get buds breaking that are hidden along the stem. So I mean, even literally cut something like this back, this big one back, and you're liable to get buds breaking along here to sprout.
I could see how
Right.
it was trying to grow straight up.
Yeah, so these are the oldest branches, and those are the newer ones that have sprouted since it got replanted or whatever. So, clipping that stuff out. An older rhododendron like this has, to me, rather cool, interesting, twisty branches. I mean, I think this is a feature to me. And again, whether you want to open up windows from the other side, from the lawn side, where people might be more likely to be walking through to see the interesting branching pattern, that's perfectly fine. But again, in here, yeah, removing some of this low stuff. I mean, there's one little leafy branch, and again, they aren't likely to have flower buds on them in here, and aren't really photosynthesizing a lot to give this rhododendron plant a lot of benefit. So removing some of this in here, I think is worth doing. So underneath this tree there are stubs, and I think this might have been from the last time when I was here pruning, and I clipped back as far as I could with this tool. I've got loppers out there on the grass, which would also work to take off these larger stems. Now we're also, so where they're shaded out and they're less likely to grow. But again, here you look at this one, here's one of those that was cut back hard, and here's some of those little sprouts I was talking about in there. And then if it had enough light, and it's kind of a little bright spot here, sort of a window almost, where maybe these will grow, will try to grow out into the light. So this is kind of the result of, could be pruning from either this spring or even from last year. And then so you got new growth, this spring's growth, and it should get hopefully bigger, larger next year.
And the thing about the dueling pruning saws is they're opposite of a carpenter's saw in that they cut on the pull stroke.
Yeah.
So it's a little easier if you're reaching up to do a
Right.
branch.
And also if you're familiar with Japanese carpentry saws, they are also usually doing that way. They also have finer teeth, finer, longer teeth, which are very, very difficult to sharpen compared to a standard rip saw or crosscut saw that American carpenters would use. Those can be more easily sharpened. These are pretty much, very often they have the hardened teeth on them, and when they stay sharp a long time, but when they get dull, it's time to just replace the blades. You know, we got handles here, and there's a screw. You can actually replace the blade themselves if you like the handle. And underneath that, to do some cleaning and clearing. And again, it may be beneficial to try to take out a little bit of the centers of these to let more light down into the middle of these bushes. You can do severe pruning on a rhododendron. Severe being, you could cut this back to 2 feet tall. I mean, you could do it completely, the whole thing. Ideally first thing in the spring for timing. And because there's hidden buds all along the stem where there were old leaves growing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whatever, you can cut it back, and usually we'd say don't leave stubs. Well, with rhododendrons, they will bud out along these bare stems. So if you want to get more sprouts and more flowers eventually down lower, you can do a fairly severe pruning on them. And it'll take 2 years to 3 years to get to that point of flowering again. But like so if you cut this back in the spring, next spring, you'll get some shoots, short shoots on here, a few leaves. The year after that, you'll get some more, maybe a flower bud for the following year. But then by the third year, it should be growing vigorously. The other way of doing it also, if you've got a very large, many stemmed rhodie like this one, you can come in here again in the spring or even in the summer and cut it back like 1/3 of the stems out. Some of those will sprout. The next year you do another third of them, and by the third year, when you get the third, that first third should be flowering. So you can, if you don't like the look of the ugly clear cut, which is what it looks like after you stub it off down to 2 feet, you can do it in stages, and then you'll get more sprouting. Go ahead.
Well, you sort of made it look like you do one area one year and then another area.
No. I would actually more like a thinning.
Okay,
so I mean, you do like every other or every third stem all the way around. I might particularly take out some of these biggest, oldest ones out of here first, and then start taking out some of the, and fairly obvious, you know, these are the oldest stems. There's about 4 or 5 big ones in there. So you take some of those, and that's kind of the same way you prune things like gooseberries and currants and rose bushes. Lilacs are another one, right. Take out some of that oldest growth because it'll stimulate new growth from down near the base too. So those are a couple of the ways that you can bring it down. And also, particularly if you want to be able to see the flowers up close, you know, up there you can't. So if you want to bring flowers more down to your level, like if you want to smell the lilacs or otherwise, again, you can take them way back and then some of those new shoots and prune to outward facing buds that hopefully will show up. Let's see, what is it? Today is the 17th of September. So pruning this time of year, if we do much pruning, we're going to be taking off flower buds. The flower buds for next year are already formed right there. So if we're pruning much of this, we're taking off flower buds. And again, that's if, you know, with the homeowner's approval, we're doing that. So again, she's, you know, a couple years down the line, she will be getting more flower buds at lower level. We're looking at some of the leaves and the spots on the leaves. And so first, like you mentioned, the lower leaves tend to have these spots on them. They are more easily, the rain splashes fungus spores up from the soil onto the leaves where it germinates. It's more moist down low than up high where they get better air circulation. Certain varieties of rhododendrons are more susceptible or more likely to get more fungus problems. Don't ask me which ones, but I mean, you can look in a landscape if somebody has a whole bunch of different kinds, and you see, well, that one really is a sickly looking tree, gets lots of fungus. Maybe it's time to remove that one because it does. You know, if you don't want to use a fungicide, and again, in Southeast Alaska, in general, fungicide recommendations for spraying are spray after every rain, or if rain is expected within 24 hours. So you're going to be
busy.
So you're going to be spraying 3 to 5 times a week, maybe, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yes.
And the fungicides there's some that are more nasty than others that we don't want to use. A wonderful, cheap, safe one is baking soda spray. Unfortunately, baking soda spray is very alkaline, and though it'll kill fungus quite nicely, the rhododendrons don't like it because then it alkalinizes the soil.
Right.
So again, in this case, these leaves, you know, the few that we have here aren't much of a problem. You know, when we walk around, we'll see if some other rhododendrons might be more susceptible to that. But again, you know, some of this removal of the flower clusters, again, kind of helps to reduce. Everything we can do to keep the fungus down is good. And even that might also include, especially in the fall, coming in a place like this and putting down a layer of clean mulch over the old leaves, which then helps to keep the fungus spores kind of buried and less likely to get splashed up back in the spring, back up onto the leaves.
Are conifer chips more acidic? Would that be preferred?
Yes, and again, I mean, the wood chip, especially if we're getting the free stuff from local pruners, we're going to be getting, well, spruce, hemlock, alders, and cottonwoods. They may all be mixed together. But certainly they are acidic. You know, the needles, cleaning out the gutters, you've got gutters full of needles, you know, toss them out there for mulch. So that will be good, certainly good stuff for the roadies. And because they are shallow rooted, having a layer of mulch on top also helps to protect the roots from winter freeze-thaw action. And it helps keep the soil moist underneath them so you don't have to water so much. So for fertilizing rhododendrons generally, up until late June is kind of, 1st of July, quit fertilizing. Rhododendron food, fertilizer for acid-loving plants is what we want to use. And you mentioned Epsom salts, which is for magnesium. It's magnesium sulfate. Benefits the rhododendrons to, especially if you look at your rhodies and some are rather more yellowish green. That's an indicator that magnesium would be a good thing to give them to make them more green, more deep green. So, and it isn't much. I mean, amount of Epsom salts is like half a teaspoon to a teaspoon in a gallon of water. So for a big one like these, you might give them a couple of gallons of that solution. For those smaller ones, you might give them half a gallon, if that. For something that's maybe 2 to 3 feet across. That would be plenty. So you don't need very much. One bag of Epsom salts would fertilize your whole yard for 2 or 3 years probably.
So you don't fertilize in the fall? Wait till
Normally
spring.
not. If you wanted to give them compost in the fall, would be fine. Don't preferably use something, cow manure, steer manure, horse manure, rabbit. Don't use chicken manure or compost chicken manure because it usually has lime from the eggshells or from the limestone or oyster shell, which are fed to chickens to promote stronger shells. So, and rhododendrons like acid soils, they don't like lime, and again, the crushed shells, oyster shells, egg shells, that sort of thing is not such a good thing for them. That may increase the odds of your needing, that may also cause them to be more yellowish green, in the springtime. So we're looking at spent flowers.
Yeah.
In this case, and then eventually they're trying to make seeds, and that is that effort.
But if they do that, then they're not going to make flower buds.
There is that too, because it takes energy to do this if you leave this on. Right. So if you remove that, then more of the energy of the plant is going to go into making more growth and hopefully more flower buds. Okay. So yeah, you may, if you leave it on, the problem is, of course, on one this size and this height, it's challenging to get up there to do that clearing. If you're feeding enough, and we have hopefully good summer with plenty of sunshine, they can get through that. Basically we're deadheading, just like we would do with annuals. If we deadhead, they'll make more flowers. With perennials, if we deadhead, we're not saving seeds, then again, that energy goes into future growth and flowering and hopefully food storage in the plant for next year. So, and a nice thing is with rhododendrons, and right after blooming is a good time to remove that. They snap off right at the base. If you're careful, you want to snap them off at the base and not any lower, so you don't snap off the little side growth, the side shoots that come off. The other benefit for deadheading is that we're removing those spent flowers which go to rotting, and we don't want to stimulate more fungus growth on these, so that too is beneficial. Okay. Again, it's time consuming, it's work. Can you do it on one this side? You need an orchard ladder to get up there to do that pruning. But it's challenging. Commercially, there's one with a flower bud. First thing you would do if you're going to do that is remove the flower bud. You don't want to try to propagate with that. Strong rooting hormone to dip them in. I'd probably even use less there. Take most of the leaves off there, down to maybe that. Rooting hormone, and in whatever the potting soil mixture is you're going to use to stick them into, and bottom heat. That's, as I understand it, is probably one of the most important things for propagating rhodies. If you've got one of these heating mats that you set your, say you've got a tray full of little starts of rhododendrons, and they even, I mean, I've seen this in greenhouses. They'll even remove, you know, half of the leaves because there isn't, that little stem can't take up much moisture. So again, by removing that helps to hopefully, you got it, and it's slow, I understand. I have not had luck ever propagating rhododendrons. Yeah. So again, I'm sure there's a YouTube video for this on how to do that, and I have yet to be successful with it. So